Good morning, I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation Magazine and AsianAviation.com. Today we are in conversation again with Stefano Baronci. He's the Director General of Airports Council International for the Asia-Pacific region. Stefano, thanks for joining me in conversation.
Thank you, Matt.
We spoke first time was a few months ago in May. Things actually looked like they were picking up a bit, but now we've seen a resurgence of COVID-19, unfortunately. Europe is having problems. The U.S. is having problems. Asia-Pacific certain places seem to have everything under control. Singapore is a good spot. Hong Kong, unfortunately, had a spike in some cases that scuttled the travel bubble that they had talked about. Give us an idea of where does the airport industry stand right now with the slowdown in international travel?
Yes, Matt. Today, ACI Asia-Pacific just released its updated forecast for 2020. And actually, it's a picture of a downgraded outlook compared to what we were expecting last August. So we expect the region, the Asia-Pacific, to lose up to 59% of its passengers by the end of the year. It is actually the region that will perform the best in relative terms compared to the other regions. But this means that in absolute terms, compared to a pre-COVID projection, the region will lose 2 billion passengers by the end of the year. So of course we cannot be satisfied with it. And the reason for dissatisfaction and concern is also because passengers translate into revenues, commercial and aeronautical ones. And the 59% decrease in passengers means that at the end of the year, the airports will have almost more than 29 billions lost compared to the projection for the year. So it's certainly a very, very tough time. It's a performance that the sector cannot afford in 2021. And some solutions have to be found. When I said before that Asia Pacific is doing relatively better, it's because it was the first one to be hit. It's the first one that could take some measures. But the measures that have been taken has been extremely cautious, especially considering quarantine. And these, of course, have limited the freedom of passengers to fly.
Let's talk about jobs. I mean, you talked about the amount of money that was going to be lost in Asia. What are we looking at in terms of job losses? Both, I guess, at the airport, you don't need as many baggage handlers. You don't need as many because there's simply not that many flights. Is there a number on the job losses to date that you can point to?
Well, of course, we rely on ATAG, which is the source that represents the cluster of aviation stakeholders. And ATAG is calculating the direct and indirect induced and catalytic impact, which in simple terms means combining the impact for the sector, the spending of the sector, and tourism. And it's ATAG said that 22 million jobs are at risk. So of course there will be time to calculate if this projection is correct. But as you know, Asia Pacific is a region, and especially some states in the region are the ones that count so much exclusively on tourism. So it is, again, a matter of concern that traffic is so far limited only to domestic connections, where the international component is really what makes the difference.
Yeah, we talked about, I've been talking with a lot of people. I talked with Conrad Clifford at IATA just the other day, and then I talked with, as you know, Jennifer Drew Scott from the Commons Project. with things like the Common Pass that the Commons Project is developing, IATA is working on a travel pass itself, and everybody's focused on, and I think ACI also is focused on pre-flight testing as a way to overcome the quarantines. Is there progress being made on that? Are governments realizing that with proper testing and things like the Common Pass or the IATA Travel Pass, that maybe they could do away with quarantines or at least minimize them to some extent?
Governments under the leadership of ICAO just agreed on a set of principles that are captured in a manual on testing and health measures that can be a good common denominator, minimum common denominator for running a risk assessment at national level. This risk assessment should lead the state to quantify its risk acceptance, and based on the response capacity of each state, any country should be in a position to set the appropriate battery of measures that are needed. Now, it's a practice that it's dynamic. It's a practice that, in my view, some states are still refining. And it's a practice that, of course, has a level of risk in terms of harmonizations of the measures that have to be put in place. So there is still, in my opinion, a long way to go. There is a need for ICAO, for the international organizations, Matt, to gather the aviation community and the health representatives at national and regional level to make sure that there is some kind of harmonizations and consistency in terms of the practices that have to be applied. And of course, this also include testing as measures that can be put in place in combination with others to relax or avoid a quarantine, which is really the measures from a passenger perspective, not just from an industry perspective, is the key aspect or reason of concern, even higher than getting the virus per se. So testing is, as you know, is a practice that airports have already started to introduce, and the WHO is still advocating for PCR testing to be the most accurate, tool in terms of specificity and sensitivity, so to detect positive cases and negative cases. Now, PCR, and this is, of course, a choice that the scientific community support, but there are some side effects or drawbacks in this. PCR test requires a long time to get the result. PCR test is also very costly, and of course the capacity to run it at an airport is very limited. So it could well fit with traffic volumes in the infancy of the recovery. But as soon as the traffic volumes will ramp up, it will hardly be the solutions. The market is proposing now quite accurate rapid tests. I think that there is still a need for the industry, the manufacturers to build a case for these tools to be introduced. And in Asia-Pacific, there are some countries that are using a rapid test, but again, it's still a minority of airports that do so.
Well, you mentioned the passenger experience, which is I'd like to go to that. Short term, it's going to be. Matter of fact, my wife is getting ready to travel, so she's got to schedule her PCR test. We've talked about my packing a bag for her so that when she comes back for her quarantine, and she's French, so I'm having to put together a special box of food and maybe a bottle of wine and things like that for her to survive quarantine. Short-term passenger experience at the airport, give us an idea of what you think, and then what do we kind of look in your crystal ball and see what you think is happening, say, the first quarter, second quarter next year, when possibly vaccines will start rolling out.
Well, we have already talked about 2020. If we try to look at 2021, the expectation is very cautious for the first half of 2021, because even if we are factoring in vaccines, the combination of testing and vaccines may be the solution, but the uptake will be not up to the task. So we can expect a recovery at global level of 20% of what we could expect pre-COVID, but in the second half, we are more optimistic. We have to be more optimistic, of course, again, accounting on the industry and the regulators to have found a solution to put in place vaccine and testing together. But if we look at a recovery versus the 2019 numbers, then we have to go well beyond the 2021 horizon, and probably having to wait for 2024 for the countries where the international traffic is the dominant one, and 2023 for the ones where the domestic traffic is the largest component, to simplify.
Are airports, and sticking with the vaccine, because everybody's talking about, the vaccines that are hitting the market, Great Britain and other places, do airports have the cargo storage capacity in some cases? One of the vaccines is required to be kept at a really super low temperature. Is there enough cargo capacity to specially handle these types of pharmaceutical products?
It's a very good question, and actually we are urging ICAO to look into it. The logistical chain is key for making sure that the vaccine is accurately transported, and airports are a key component of this chain. Now, there are lots of implications from an operational perspective, from a safety perspective, and a security perspective. You mentioned the point of the equipment, the appropriate equipment to storage vaccines. And there are some key hubs that are working on that. There are a few of them at the moment. But I think that there are other aspects, and of course, but there are vaccines also, as you know, that do not require that kind of equipment. That being said, we are also working on the operational implications in terms of movements that will spike, and the necessity of having to adapt the slot allocation system. In terms of the noise regulation, to make sure that the aircraft can fly and have priority to fly to transport this scarce asset. It is a scarce asset, so because of that, there is a security implication, and in terms of security, the security risk assessment will have to be run. It may be the target of some criminal groups, so the Interpol has been clear in detecting this as a risk, and of course, from a safety perspective, this is also a dangerous good. So the ICAO regulation that is allowing for X volumes of goods to be transported will have to review these standards accordingly.
Sounds like a very complicated operation. Yes. Stefano, I know you're very busy. You've been in meetings all night, you said, and you've got more tonight, and you need another cappuccino or another cup of coffee. I know it's hard to find a bright spot in the past year. It's been amazing to me how the industry has come together. It took a little bit, but organizations like yours, IATA, ICAO, have seemed to sort of come together for the common good of the industry. Is there anything other than that or similar to that you can see that's happened this year? And short of a successful rollout of a vaccine, are there bright spots that we can look at for next year?
Well, I think as in a region that counts very much on domestic traffic, we are lucky to count on a recovery that in countries like India, Japan, and China and South Korea becomes to be apparent. We are lucky also because those are countries that spend time to take care of the populations, and but the challenge is still there, Matt. And of course, as a sector, we are extremely concerned that to look for the right solutions and to look for them quite relatively quickly. I mean, of course, in proportion to the complexity of the challenge. So I guess that an extra effort will have to be made in the first half of next year to make sure that, again, there are tangible signals that there is continuity in terms of the recovery beyond, the up and down trend that we have experienced over the last months.
Stefano Baronci, Director General at ACI Asia-Pacific, thanks for joining me in conversation.
Thank you very much, Matt, for having me.